Trauma Therapist Podcast Plus listeners can listen to episodes early and ad-free right now. Become a Plus listener by going to Apple Podcasts, searching for the Trauma Therapist Podcast, and signing up today. All right, welcome back to the Trauma Therapist Podcast. My name is Guy McPherson. My mission is to help trauma therapists be their incredible selves, to be human, to be real, not just a clinician. I'm a big believer in who we are is more important than what we know. And this requires cultivating authenticity, genuineness, and vulnerability, and that requires intention. You can learn more about my courses and workshops by going to thetraumatherapistproject.com. That's thetraumatherapistproject.com. Let's get started. All right, so 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. All right, folks, welcome back to the podcast. I am thrilled to have back John Clarke. John, welcome back.
Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. Awesome, man. So John's mission is to accelerate recovery from trauma, anxiety, depression, and addiction so that together people can create a more peaceful and connected world. As a trauma therapist, John creates a custom integrative therapy using a blend of evidence-based therapies, including internal family systems, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, as well as somatic experiencing. Not only has he committed his professional life over the past 10 years to helping others, he's personally done the work over the course of 20 plus years in his own therapy journey and healing from his own trauma. John just launched his own podcast called Going Inside, Healing Trauma from the Inside Out. Welcome back. Been a long time.
Been a very long time. A lot's changed since I was here last, and last time here as the business coach part of me, helping therapists with their business. And now, as the clinical work that I do is kind of, it's been a new chapter for me, in figuring out who I am clinically and what to do with that. And now really building a new platform about my clinical work. So, thanks again for having me on to talk a little bit about all that.
Awesome. So remind our listeners where you're from originally and where you are currently.
Grew up in the Blue Ridge Mountains of Virginia, a town called Roanoke, and probably would have spent the rest of my life there if I hadn't met my wife, who's from San Francisco, where I live now. So we jumped around the past few years, North Carolina and then Paris, France for a few years until COVID happened. We came back here where we got settled. My daughter was born, and then I started a new group practice here in San Francisco that's a trauma practice. So a lot's changed, and some things are similar to my life in San Francisco before, but a lot is different.
Awesome. All right, so let's start here. Before we went live, you talked a little bit about the genesis of your whole journey. Let's jump into that.
Yeah. I can say that, in fact, I heard you talk about this on your show recently about how graduate students are largely unprepared to treat trauma. I think it was with Janina Fisher, you guys were talking about this, and the only class I had remotely on that was on crisis intervention, right? Which is like a natural disaster is happening. Here's how to help people in that moment, right. Which is not trauma work by any means. Trauma work often happens when the dust settles and people are left to pick up the pieces, or years later, the trauma is destroying their lives and their relationships and their nervous systems. And then they go, now what? I think I need help. Like many therapists, I realized after 5 or 6 years of being in practice that although I was comfortable having clients talk about their trauma, I really didn't know how to treat it and felt there was a big deficit there in my practice. I got EMDR trained, and then the Monday after the training, I started using it and saw that it worked incredibly well for doing what it's supposed to do, helping people.
So let me just interject.
Yeah, go ahead.
So during that time when people were sharing their traumas and you were like feeling inside, you didn't know what to do, what were you doing, or what was going on inside of you?
Well, I was trained, for better or worse, in a richly psychodynamic program. So everything the client's talking about out there has a parallel to what's happening between you and I. So that lens, we're always looking for this parallel process, right? So a client out there is really demanding on other people, and I'm looking for a parallel where they're demanding on me, and using that as grist for the therapeutic mill and using interpersonal process comments. So that's the lens I was trained in for so long, and really had a hard time stepping out of that. Really, you're just working with transference. That's the main model, and trying to provide a corrective emotional experience by doing that type of dynamic differently. So the client is demanding with me. I can make a comment about that in an open and warm way, and we can kind of work through that, together. And hopefully they internalize that shift and take it out there into their lives. When it came to trauma, and especially the memory piece of trauma, if a client sits down and they start accessing that memory of when they were assaulted, they're in that memory all of a sudden, right? And I genuinely didn't know what to do other than help them talk about it, right? Which I think a lot of therapists do, well intending, not knowing you're just putting them right back in their trauma. Then your 50 minutes is up and you send them on their way, and now they've got to go do something to either get back in their body or have 7 or 8 drinks, or have a road rage outburst or whatever it is. And so yeah, as well intending as I didn't know what actual healing from trauma looked like. Yeah.
So IFS, you came across this workshop or?
Yeah. So a couple years, so EMDR helped, and it was helping my clients a lot. And I feel like it's really good in helping the memory component of trauma. But I never felt like it was enough and as complete as I wanted to offer my clients. So a couple years ago, I burned out entirely from being a therapist. I think part of it was this psychodynamic piece around having to be this person for 20 people a week. And the way I was trained to basically draw out transference from clients and then to use that interpersonally was just draining me. It felt like a heavy mask to wear. It always did. And I struggled to take that mask off to kind of feel like I could be myself in session, to be known by clients. So I felt confused in that I was both really close with my clients in a way, in a form of closeness, and also felt very kind of invisible because I had been trained so traditionally, right? A bit of that blank slate piece where I want to be somewhat blank so they can project onto me, right? So after burning out entirely and not doing therapy and thinking, man, maybe I'm not even cut out for this, right? Like my identity, my lifelong dream, my passion, maybe I should just do therapy adjacent things, right? Like coaching, business coaching for therapists, running my group practice, whatever. I was sitting down at lunch, and a friend of mine, she started talking about internal family systems therapy. And the way she started talking about it was like talking about the new Apple headset that just came out. Like I've never seen someone talk about a therapy model like this, especially a client. A lot of people, like, they enjoy therapy or they're glad they do it, but it's also hard, and she was so over the moon about it and such a kind of fanatic that I was like, I got to look into this again. And I vaguely remember this IFS thing, from grad school. And I thought it was like, okay, you have, your dad internalized, so you have to try to like control that part of you. And that's kind of my sense of it. Yeah, very wrong, very an inaccurate sense of what IFS is. But that led me down this road to go start learning about it and immersing myself in the IFS world. Yeah.
Okay, so just to back up a little bit, when this client was talking about IFS, what was she lighting up about specifically about it?
I think, in my experience, shame is such a huge part of the work we do, especially in trauma work. And a lot of models, I think, kind of talk around shame or managing shame. IFS, the way that IFS regards humanity and pathology is so inherently compassionate, right? So if someone comes to me and they say, well, I'm here because, I got really angry. I was in a fight with my wife and I got angry and I punched the drywall. So now I'm here. And there's this thick layer of shame already, right? That something's wrong with me. My mentor and the guy who taught me IFS, he just passed away a couple of weeks ago, Derek Scott. He would always say this idea of, what if nothing's wrong with you? right? And that struck me. So client comes in and instead of going, how do we manage this anger of yours? How do we control it? Right. People even put in like, I'm here for anger management versus how do we invite in the part of you that's holding anger, get to know it, honor it, send compassion to it, right? See if we can help it out, bring it into the present. The model just kind of clicked for me. And it's kind of like, we all start off with Carl Rogers, and this is like, just so far beyond that in terms of not only regarding clients positively, but regarding their parts positively. And this idea that all parts have good intention, right? Dick Schwartz's book, There's No Bad Parts.
Right.
So the model just made sense to me from that perspective. And the second I started using it, clients started to get it too, right? A part of you says, hey, you should go to the gym so you can get in shape and lose weight. You need to lose weight. Another part of you says, screw it, let's have 7 pieces of pizza. Those are parts, right? Most people can get that. And then that's a starting point for the therapy, right? Hey, can we get to know the part that doesn't want to go to the gym?
Right.
And can you open yourself to that part?
Yeah. I love what you're saying. I mean, it's so allowing in a sense. There's a feeling that I get when I talk about that IFS and think of it in terms of my own situation is, well, okay, this is a part. It doesn't mean that I'm completely messed up. This, let's look at this part. And it's that perspective is what it is, just helpful, easy. It's de-shaming.
It's de-shaming. And I think that opens the door for healing in a whole new way, especially with trauma clients, where a lot of times when people are traumatized, there's also a belief they hold around what happened to them, right? So from an EMDR perspective, as we're doing the actual reprocessing, you just ask the client, is there a belief that goes along with this image, right? Or this memory? I'm worthless. It was my fault. I deserved it, right? The way that IFS looks at that is that a part of you is holding that belief, right? And a lot of times when that part is kind of driving the bus in our lives, many of us are living our daily lives being led by a part that is young and wounded and traumatized, right? And it explains a lot. So we have those parts, and then we also have protector parts that work hard to make sure that vulnerable, wounded part isn't seen or activated or, contacted in any way.
So you started looking into IFS, you got really excited about it. And now talk to us, John, about what this did for you as a person and in relationship to your clients.
As a person, I don't know who said this. Maybe it was Yalom who said, you can't take clients further than you've gone yourself as a therapist. And I believe that to be true. I offer that to the clinicians at my teaching practice here who are all trauma therapists and pre-licensed. And so, I went through EMDR as a client before I started offering it, right? I really wanted clients to know, even if they didn't know, or I didn't say it out loud, but have a sense that I've done this work. I know how hard it is to do this work. Same goes for the IFS piece. I have trauma from both my childhood and my adulthood. And so there are parts that me and my IFS therapist had to go toward that were extremely painful and extremely unsettling to kind of go back there. And yet, because I had spent so much time as a kind of a relational therapist, I knew what to do when we accessed those young, wounded, vulnerable parts. My teacher, Derek Scott, would use the example, let's say, in IFS, we talk about this idea of self, your core self, your inner wisdom, whatever you want to call it, right? Self or self energy. Imagine that you're driving down the road and you see a 7-year-old boy sitting on the sidewalk. He's lost. He can't find his parents. Maybe he's got bumps and bruises on him, and he's completely scared. Imagine how you would approach him, right? So most people listening right now, whether you're a parent or not, have an idea of how they would do that, right? You would get down on his level. You would approach him slowly. Hey, buddy, what's going on? Tell me what happened. It's okay now. I'm here. Let's figure this out together, right? That's self energy. And so much of IFS really is about helping the client access self energy, because self knows exactly what to do in that situation with that 7-year-old in real life and with that 7-year-old boy inside who's still stuck and hurting and traumatized.
So did this whole process, this whole learning for you, uh, allow you to what, be more authentic? Can we use that word in session or what?
I would say so. I would say that's the goal of IFS in a way, is that when we are self-led, we are more authentic. We're not being led by a part.
Mm-hmm.
Um, a lot of my life and in a lot of moments, even professionally, I was led by a part, right? A part that was carrying hurt or a part that had something to prove. And now I know what that feels like, even on a physical level. I know physically what it feels like when a part takes over, right? So if someone in my life says, "Hey, John, can I talk to you about something?" and my stomach clenches up, my throat is tight, and I'm getting ready, right? To fight or run away or shut down or whatever, that's a part.
Uh,
When I'm in self and they say, "Hey, can I talk to you about something?" Even if they are going to offer me something difficult to hear or some feedback, if I'm in self and I can be open to it and I'm physically open and curious about what they're saying, I can take that in, even if it's hard, right?
mm,
I need to reassure my parts that I can handle it, right? Because when our parts don't trust us, they're the ones that jump in, take the wheel of the bus, and all of a sudden they're driving. And so I'm having this interaction with a colleague or my partner or whatever from a 7-year-old part, right? Who is scared
mm.
and wounded and freaked out and traumatized. So it explains so much of the disruption in our lives and our relationships, right? And our conflict, really. A part of me is activated and a part of them is activated. So it's kind of part versus part. It explains a lot of our conflict, both personally and even more globally in terms of our inability to get along or see each other. So yeah.
So for our listeners out there who maybe have heard of IFS but aren't too familiar, what would it look like? Someone walks into your office, maybe you know they've experienced trauma, or maybe you don't know. How do you begin to work with them? What are these parts? How do you introduce these parts?
So one way would be to just talk about them or talk about the model a little bit. And for some clients, that helps. Hey, there's this thing called IFS. You could use that example of one party who wants to go to the gym, one party who wants to stay home. Um, we could talk about that a little bit, or we could just kind of start doing the model, right? So with my client with the anger, instead of saying, "Hey, let's figure out how to control that anger," and maybe when you're about to be angry, when you're angry, you can take a breath or slap yourself on the wrist with a rubber band or whatever, which is what a lot of therapy focuses on, right? Like, how do we
Mm-hmm.
get rid of the symptom versus what is the symptom communicating
Mm-hmm.
and what part is it coming from? And how do we go toward that part? So for him, I literally just, the paradigm shift was, let's invite in that part that's holding anger, right? And if you want, you can close your eyes. IFS calls this insight, right? Going inside, close your eyes and just connect with that moment where you punched a hole in the drywall. Notice what happens, even notice what happens in your body. So to me, I use a lot of the somatic piece of IFS. Notice what's happening in your body. Oh, there's this tension in my stomach. Okay, notice that. And when you focus on this angry part of you, how do you feel toward it? And the client goes, "Oh, I'm annoyed and I need it to stop, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or else it's going to ruin my life and I'm going to get a divorce." I get that. I get that. So the part of you that's annoyed or judges the anger, can you ask that part if it's willing to soften? Can that part step behind you? Can that part just hang out and watch as we get to know the angry part? And then can you turn back toward the angry part? How are you feeling toward it? Well, I feel sad for him. Right? This guy's really out of control. Okay, got it. Can you send him that compassion?
Mm-hmm.
Right? He's out of control. He just punched a hole in the wall.
So by
Yeah.
inviting the client to do this, to have this perspective, what are you doing? What are you drawing out? What are you essentially inviting them to do here?
Yeah. So the three kind of components of IFS that I think of, this helps me think about the work, is unblending, unburdening, and self-leadership and integration. So the unblending is the part holding anger is a part of me. And to your point, even that can help reduce the shame, right? It's a part of me. It's not my totality, right? I'm not, it's like I'm an angry person or I'm an alcoholic versus like I have a part that likes to drink, right? I have a part that compulsively drinks. Even that is so de-shaming for people that if they can get a little distance from it and start to get to know the part that likes to drink, can you get to know the part that holds the anger, right? Even though the other part goes, this anger is ugly and we got to get it under control. This is going to ruin our lives, right? We get that, but it's kind of like we have to go into that part and be able to get curious toward it and really to explore its fears. And this is a huge part of IFS for me, is when we get to know these parts, they're often holding fears, right? So is this part of him really angry, or is it really scared, right? It's scared that that I'm being called bad by my wife and she might leave me, right? So then the anger happened. Oh, that makes sense. That might also be connected to an early memory, an early moment, right, where this part took on this role, and we want to get to know that as well. So then if it's kind of being offered to us, we walk through the unburdening sequence, which has to do with going in, witnessing the part in its story and how it got this job, right? Offering it a new possibility of, what if you didn't have to do this job? Is that something you'd be interested in? There could be a do-over. So this corrective emotional experience where, does this part want your help doing this moment over again? And then bringing it into the present. So updating the part, bringing it into the present, into this room with you, into your life today, updating it on how life is, right? So that part is no longer operating from this 7-year-old moment in time. And then releasing something. So the actual letting go of thoughts, feelings, beliefs that it's been holding around, I'm worthless, no one loves me, whatever it may be. And then integrating that part back into the system and helping it find a place where it can settle, and ultimately learning to trust self, right? So that's the ultimate goal, right? Is that we have our parts. We're not trying to get rid of our parts. We're trying to help them out of their extreme roles and bring them into self-leadership.
All of which sounds and is, I mean, that's intense. That's intense work.
Yeah.
By any stretch of the imagination, that's intense. But you can feel your energy. I mean, you've got so much energy around this. It's really cool to see and feel.
It's intense and it's gentle. You know, I'm, as much as I love EMDR, I also feel that at its core, it's exposure therapy. There's a form of it that's exposure therapy. We're going toward the tough stuff and we're going to expose you to that while we stimulate both sides of your brain, right? With IFS, we might be going to that same memory, but when we go in there with self and we let self lead the way, and self is compassionate and kind and creative and connected and all these things, self knows just what to do to help this part that is often young and wounded. We can also ask parts not to flood the system as we're doing this, because there is that risk of getting flooded, just like with EMDR, it can happen with IFS as well. But rather than the therapist saying, I've got the steering wheel and I'm deciding kind of where the trauma work goes or how much we're going to expose you to today, in IFS, we completely trust self. And our role as an IFS therapist is to help clients access self and bring that self into, their system to access their parts and help their parts. So in that regard, it takes a lot of pressure off the therapist to kind of know what to do next. The main role of the therapist then is the therapist themselves being in self energy and working with our own parts, right? Parts of me that want this to go well, parts that want the client to think I'm a good therapist. Parts that want them to heal from this trauma, parts of me that want the client to not kill themselves, right? Or to drink less, right? Because I'm scared about, parts of me are scared about that. So that's where a lot of the work is for me.
So does that then call on you to talk about when you're in that moment, when you're working with someone as a therapist, an IFS therapist, are you, what are you inviting yourself to do?
Even before the session, I'm checking in with my parts a little bit. And I have a part right now saying, this all sounds crazy. Because it's like, there's this fear of multiple personality disorder kind of thing with IFS. And like, guess what? We're all multiple, or this is where this model came from, right? This multiplicity idea. You have parts like little personalities inside of you, which on one hand is really crazy. On the other hand is really natural. So as I get to know my parts, or even like I can name that I have parts that were and are nervous about this episode, right? Or doing this interview with you, parts that want to show that I'm a good therapist, parts that want to show that I'm competent. In other words, a fear that I might be seen as incompetent, or someone might be going, this guy doesn't know what he talks about.
I have that part show up every time I do an interview.
And you've been doing it 800 times. Huh? So then my job is not to talk that part out of its feelings. Just like with my 4-year-old daughter, I'm trying not to talk her out of her feelings, because that doesn't really work. Mm-hmm. I go in and I offer compassion and reassurance. Hey, it makes sense that you're nervous about this interview with Guy, because you really want this to go well, right? And you really care about this IFS thing, and you want to get it right, and you want people to like IFS as much as you do. That makes sense. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. Awesome. All right. So as we kind of wind down here, let's talk about your podcast.
Yeah.
Going Inside.
Yeah.
When did you start it? Why did you start it?
We're 7 episodes deep, and I have the business I've been building since 2015, Private Practice Workshop, around teaching therapists about business. That was a way that I just kind of fell into, that I could help a lot of therapists, with my goal being to reduce human suffering on this earth, which is still the goal. I just have a new vision now. The way that IFS has changed my life and changed my clients' lives, I have an urgency to bring that to people. I'm also not claiming I know everything about IFS by any means, but just that what it's done for me has moved me so much, and what it's done for my clients has been so transformative, and really I didn't know what deep healing was until I did my first unburdening with a trauma client. And I thought, this is deep work. This is spiritual work. And everyone needs to know about this. So I have this urgency to bring it to more people. So while I had that experience of building a platform, building an audience like you have, but for a different reason, I just want to now bring something to people suffering from trauma, and to trauma therapists, to bring the IFS model to them. Not only is it a modality, it's really kind of like a way of life, kind of like, if you and I have conflict, I can honor that I have parts activated around it. Those parts are not all of me, and you might have parts up. Can I learn to love my parts? Can I learn to love your parts? Right? Because if I can do that, I can humanize people. I can humanize anyone, right? Even people that do unthinkable things. That's a part of them that's in pain. So I really start walking through the world a little differently with IFS, and just seeing people differently, seeing pain differently, seeing healing differently. So that's why I started the podcast. It's called Going Inside, and primary focus, is healing trauma through IFS, but we've already made some departures into EMDR, somatic experiencing, pulling in different modalities. But it's been great so far. It's deepened my learning about trauma and what healing really means. And I just hope that it helps some people out there as kind of like an adjunct to the therapy they're getting, to also listen to the podcast and learn from some of our great guests.
So would you say it's for therapists, for survivors, both? Who?
The idea is it's for survivors. It's for my trauma clients. That's who I think about when I'm kind of making these episodes. I think naturally trauma therapists will listen as well, but I've been serving therapists for a very long time now, and I really wanted to bring something to clients and make it really user friendly. And when I'm listening to a guest, I try to decode things a little bit to make it user friendly for a non-therapist. So that's the vision for the podcast, is really to eradicate suffering from trauma and PTSD. That's really, I know personally the effects that trauma's had on my life, and the close calls I've had, and the disruption to my relationships, my health. I know that trauma can ruin your life. That's never lost on me. And so that goes back to that urgency piece of just wanting to bring IFS to as many people as possible, so that it can help them.
Awesome. John, awesome, man. Seriously, dude, you're doing it. I can feel it. Seriously.
Thank you.
When I do these interviews, I sometimes, not all the times, but a lot of times, I can feel it, and I can feel your in, intenseness in the best way possible, best use of that word, and just your this groundedness you have. It's really cool to feel. So we'll have your podcast linked up here at the show notes page at the traumatherapistpodcast.com. Now, are you working? You're obviously doing individual stuff. Are you doing group stuff with people? How can people learn more about what you're doing?
Yeah, I see clients one-on-one. I'm back to my clinical work, full steam. And so, if people in California are interested in getting therapy with me, they can go to johnclarketherapy.com. If therapists or other types of healers, coaches, whoever are interested in learning IFS, I offer consultation as well, which really IFS consultation is about the therapist learning their own system, learning their own parts. So it looks a lot like therapy, right? I'm going to kind of do IFS on you as a way to teach you IFS. That's a very IFS thing, is to teach by experiencing. So yeah, for anyone who wants to learn the model, offer one-on-one consultation and plan to offer consultation groups as well before too long.
Awesome. John, pleasure, man. Love to have you back. I mean, I feel like I wanted to ask you a lot more questions, and we could have gone a lot of different ways too, but really excited about everything you have going on here. And thanks so much for being here.
Thanks again for having me. Good to see you.
All right, man. Take care.
Cheers.